Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I'm Bob Lee. I'm the founder of the Center for Sports Media here at Seton Hall, and on behalf of the Executive Director, BJ Schechter, we'd like to welcome you. Today's program is a collaboration between the Center for Sports Management and the Center for Sports Media and the Sport Management, of course, Center at the Stillman School of Business. Thanks, as always, to the support we get from our respective deans, Dean Brian Crable at the College of Human Development, Culture, and Media, and the Dean at Stillman, Joyce Strouser. The Center for Sports Media Speaker Series, and this is our 22nd event. It's the 7th in this academic year alone. We're quite proud of that. Just in this academic year alone, Stephen A. Smith was here for the second time working with our students. We also had Billie Jean King here several months ago, and the legendary Sports Illustrated journalist Peter King was here quite recently. So today we look at college sports, crossroads or crisis. The answer probably is yes. We're standing here on the campus of the NIT champions. Yeah. Told you so, men's committee. But days after that great victory, one of our we can say that, best players, Dre Davis, entered the infamous portal and left to play his final season at Ole Miss. So clearly, the template college sports from just 6 or 7 years ago has been obliterated. Name, image, likeness, an expanded college football playoff where the coin of the realm is in billions, not millions of dollars, and the obliteration made complete in the marketplace, aided by, of all things, a unanimous Supreme Court several years ago, where Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in that 9-0 decision, found against the NCAA. There's the good justice. Nowhere else in America can businesses get away with agreeing not to pay their workers a fair market rate on the theory that their product is defined by not paying their workers a fair market rate. And under ordinary principles of antitrust law, it is not evident why college sports should be any different. The NCAA is not above the law, end quote. Now, this is not just some kind of a judicial abstraction. It is a cold cash reality. Here's the head football coach at Nebraska, Matt Rule.
Make no mistake that a good quarterback in the portal costs, $1 million to $1.5 million to $2 million right now. So just on the same page, right? So, there's some teams that have $6 or $7 million players playing for them.
They're on a whole
Real money being spent. Well, today we're going to begin with a conversation between two gentlemen who have been in the room when things have been decided and know this very down to the granular details. 34 years ago, that particular piece, the opinion piece in the New York Times by Charles Grantham, called for college players, in this case basketball players, to be paid. Then it was seen as a revolutionary stake in the sand, and now, of course, it's an opinion leader. We have been blessed here at the Hall for over 20 years by Charlie's experience and his guidance, the director of the Center for Sports Management at the Stillman School. Welcome, Charles Grantham. Now, 54 years ago, this past February, this was the cover of Sports Illustrated, Tom. The best high school player in the United States. He would play on that star-crossed Olympic team of 1972, study as a Rhodes Scholar, 11 seasons playing in the NBA, serving 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives as a congressman from Massachusetts. Now the president and the CEO of Lead One, that's the organization of Division I athletic directors. A Seton Hall welcome for Tom McMillen. So, gentlemen, I will leave it to you to have a conversation. I'll be over in a few minutes, and we'll be joined by the balance of the panel. Thank you.
Great to be here, Tom. It's good to see you.
Only correction in that introduction is Maryland, not
No,
Massachusetts, but
not Massachusetts.
small difference. Thanks.
Well, first of all, please, thank you so much for being here.
Great.
We think you could, if there's anyone better than to talk about this subject with me, it's you. Come on. That article was written in 1990. Of course, you were in the NBA at the time. And we think about Brett Kavanaugh and a course correction change, how important that is. And I think back at that time because in 1983, we had a similar kind of course correction to create a revenue sharing agreement and salary cap for players, which you were very much involved with at the time. But those 6 or 7 years from that time frame motivated me to write that piece because I said, this is the kind of fixed share of revenue that our college student athletes need, both football and basketball at the time, because they're the revenue earners here. So when we go back and think this is 34 years later, and we're still talking about sharing revenue with the very student athletes who produce these billions of dollars. And what is that fair share? But before we get to that, because I want to talk exclusively about that, I want you to talk a little bit about Lead One and what is the mission and goal of that organization?
So Lead Run represents all the FBS schools right now. It's roughly 134. It changes. We're adding schools. And we primarily work on all these issues, whether it's transfer portals, employment, name, image, and likeness. And we try to work with the NCAA, give them feedback. Our set of schools are very different than the 1,000 other schools. I mean, these are big schools. They range from Notre Dame to Texas A&M to Army. And so they all have in common big football programs, which is really what the whole FBS football bowl subdivision's about. So that's what we work on, all those issues. And
So as an advocate for athletic directors,
yeah, in other words, we try to bring them together and coalesce around issues, whether sports betting or, football was one that we worked on a year ago because football in college sports is so fragmented. You've got the college football playoff, which is controlled by the conferences, yet the NCAA makes all the rules for football. They run the lesser division championships, but they get nothing out of FBS football. And so it's a very disjointed system. And there is no real chief operating officer like the college sports has. And so that was one of the recommendations, is that somewhere there's got to be someone that is more, not like a commissioner, but a chief operating officer. Because the college sports playoff is just, they describe themselves as just an event business. So here's the NCAA is running college football, but really has a very what's the word I'm looking for, have a very uncoordinated way of doing so. So football was one of the areas we tackled. We tackled NIL. We tackled, we've been working on the employment issue. To your point in your op-ed, which I agree with the headline of your piece. That,
years ago, Tom, 34 years ago.
I wrote a book back in when I was in Congress called Out of Bounds, and I had stipends for players in that book. I had an antitrust exemption in that bill. I had put in Congress an antitrust exemption to restore the television monopoly for the NCAA, but I conditioned it on giving the players a cut, making sure that Title IX was fully adhered to, making sure that we induce schools to sponsor more sports, not less sports, giving more opportunities to kids. So, so we were both back 30-some years ago, kind of a little maybe ahead of the curve.
Well, one of the things that Kavanaugh suggests, by the way, and as I look at the NCAA, I always characterize them as what I call avoidance as a way in which they negotiate here. They're waiting and waiting and waiting for the Congress to bail them out here.
Well, they've been very
I'm
reactive.
asking you this, since you are an advocate for a trade association of athletic directors, at some point, the main question here is, will we ever see someone to represent the interests of the student athlete? Could it be a trade association instead of a union and employees, instead of going through that legal issue right now? The NCAA could acknowledge that.
The answer is yes. And by the way, your senator here, Cory Booker, who I met with last week, is in the middle. Well, let me just lay out the politics of college sports right now. So you have Republicans pretty much unanimous that they do not want employment status for student athletes, don't want unionization, don't want collective bargaining. You move to the Democrats, remember that Congress is about 50-50. You move to the Democrats, and I would say two-thirds of the Democrats would like to see employment, unionization, and collective bargaining, but a third are ambivalent, third are not so supportive. So you probably have 60% of the Congress that's against employment. But I think what Cory is trying to do is so you have on one side non-unionization, non-employment, and the other side unionization, employment. And so where is the compromise? The compromise is somewhere along the line where you create a collective bargaining mechanism for all student athletes. Because, you have crazy coaches, you need some voice from the student athletes. And the sports that have high revenue, like basketball and football, they need a piece of that of revenue share. Quite frankly, I would prefer it coming in a licensing form so that it's very easy. The bigger sports have bigger television contracts. They should just have a licensing agreement related to the television contracts. But if I give $1 million to the athletes, to the male athletes, under Title IX, I have to give $1 million to the women athletes. And so it is a complicated issue. College sports is being driven by lots of antitrust lawsuits, but Title IX is probably the strongest force in college sports, and it's going to be a factor in all this. I mean, we have antitrust cases, the House case, which is a triple damage case, $4 billion. But, Title IX has not spoken in that case, and I think that when you add Title IX to it, it gets very complicated. Here's, for example, what they're saying is $1.3 billion of retroactive NIL payments should be paid to athletes, largely because of television rights. And they figure out, well, most of that television came from men. So if you triple that, you get to $4 billion. All that would be paid primarily to male athletes. I think you got a major Title IX issue. And so these are complicated issues. I think we need a new model. I call it a new social compact involving, because, it goes back to what you said. In the 90s, we had a hearing and I made a comment. I said, if coaches are going to be making $1 million, which they were approaching, you're going to have student athletes making $1 million. And so I would like to see the student athlete model remain. I would like to see those high revenue sports have some kind of remuneration back to those athletes. I would like to see Title IX adhered to. I would like to see incentives for education, for kids to get graduates, get degrees. And one of the things real quickly is on NIL right now, one of the positive things, kids are staying in school longer. I mean, they're making a choice. Well, I'm going to stay in school longer. More kids are getting graduate degrees in college sports than ever before. I would have loved to have that opportunity
At that time.
So, but I think it's a really interesting thing. I think Congress has to codify it. Otherwise, you're just going to continue to have antitrust lawsuits. And I really think the big issue in college sports, which goes back to a bill that I put in 30 years ago, I think they need to restore the television monopoly to college sports. And that's because if you did that with all the regular season sports, you'd probably get 2 to 3 times the money. And I think that money should go for good purposes. 100,000 scholarships for HBCU kids. We ought to be doing more in college sports to expand opportunity, not limit it. And and so I actually would love to see a whole new model of college sports that's purely in line with our institutions of higher learning, but also expanding opportunities across the board. I mean, that to me would be the nirvana.
Well, I think that's where we are, though. We're sitting here with an NCAA that refuses to budge. Now, quite frankly, they are waiting for the litigation to force them to decide how to.
It's a little different than that, Charlie. I would say that would be the case of the prior. I know that Mark Emmert was sometimes reactive. Charlie Baker is a former governor. He understands that there are, if you look at college sports and the 500,000 athletes, the 50,000 who are playing football and basketball and maybe a couple other sports are very different than your softball team and your field hockey team. And so you need to have a flexible model. And I think he understands that. His proposal was an effort to try to address that. So I don't think there's as much resistance. I think they're trying to find a place that works. But whatever they do, you're going to probably need, unless you go full-blown collective bargaining, employment unionization, which is very tricky in a lot of right-to-work states across the country. Unless you can figure out a model, then you're going to probably need Congress to codify it. And so that's kind of where we are. But I think part of the problem is in college sports is that because of all the antitrust lawsuits, you've got the conferences who are all very powerful. The NCAA is less powerful. And so there's no one really in control. You don't have like a commissioner of the NFL.
Well, but it does appear that they are wishing for Congress to delegate this kind of power and control to the NCAA so they can recoup the NIL and perhaps go to a group licensing program.
Well, I think the main objective from the NCAA right now is, yes, to get a national standard for NIL, to have some kind of system that works for NIL, maybe not used as much for recruiting and inducements as it is being used today. But I think the number one ask for the NCAA is let us come up with a plan with Congress where we can live and not be sued every day for antitrust. And I think that's their biggest concern, which is reasonable. I mean, in sports, you got to have a national association, even though Division I is very different than Division II and Division III. And I would argue, like Charlie Baker, Division I probably needs to be split up into the real high revenue sports schools and some of the lesser ones. But I do think you need to have a strong association. And today, it's almost impossible because the NCAA can't make a single rule without having an antitrust case thrown at them. So I'm sympathetic to their inability to regulate. I'm also a believer in higher ed. I served on the University of Maryland board for 7 or 8 years. I serve on it again. You want to make sure these kids are getting an education. You want to make sure that's a fair deal. You want to make sure that we're not just mini NFLs and mini NBAs. We got to make sure this is all part of colleges and universities. That's what makes it great.
Well, I'm not as confident about the NCAA as you may be. Back in the 80s, I testified in a bill called the Student Athlete Protection Act. Mm-hmm. But what I discovered throughout that process is the collusion and conspiring of the various parts of the NCAA to prevent that real protection. So I'm suggesting a trust fund for student athletes that they can't access until they actually get their degree. That sort of satisfies the academic side, but at the same time, it puts them in a more positive light.
It's not
8 or 10 years later, because 99% of them will never be drafted.
Well, isn't that very similar to what Charlie Baker proposed?
That is what he proposed.
And the
But-
trust fund.
But I'm trying to figure out, is he proposing that because of the pressure that's being brought to him at this point? And is he really acting on behalf of the NCAA to reinstate the power and control that they originally had? Because we're going back years. As Kavanaugh points out, price fixing labor is price fixing labor.
Right.
No other business can do that. So why should the NCAA on that issue be able to navigate around it so long?
Well, his proposal was a floor, not a cap. I mean, I think he's trying to throw out there ideas that recognize there's some rich schools out there that can do a lot more for their student athletes. But, look, in my view, I don't think Cory Booker and Ted Cruz are negotiating this are going to get down in the weeds with all these little details. I think what they're going to set up is a structure so that even women's volleyball will have a collective bargaining process and that other athletes will have a collective bargaining process. I think that there are examples across the American economy. Look at some of the gig workers who have collective bargaining, but they're not employees. So you could, by way of a licensing agreement, give kids a piece of that pie, but then they would have this bargaining process that would hopefully protect them. And that's up and down the ladder. I don't think if you talk to, Congresswoman Lori Trahan, who's a woman, former student athlete, she would say collective bargaining is as important for the volleyball player as it is to the football player. So I'm hopeful that we can come up with a new social compact for college sports. And I'm not, my view on this is that it's in a political process right now. You've got the Democrats who are, very strongly supported by labor. Labor would love to have student athletes be employees. They would love to have collective bargaining. They'd love to have them be part of a union. And then you've got all this on the other side that says no to that. So you're going to have to figure out a compromise. And that compromise fundamentally has to start with what you said, that they got to have bargaining rights. You got to have a fair bargaining system to give them a chance. Now, here's the complicated part about that, is that if I'm a football team and I bargain $1 million for my team, guess what? I got to write $1 million for the women athletes too. So,
Well, I think it goes the other way. If you reach the percentage, that's the floor. Let's say it's 40%.
right.
That 40% can obviously be split among players of both
Half,
male and female.
half going to the,
Well, again, that's why we have PhDs in analytics, okay?
Yeah.
They can figure this out. My point is that it's very obvious and has been for better than 40 years. And Brett Kavanaugh, by saying fixing or price fixing labor is price fixing labor, he's also bringing up this transfer of wealth that these kids, many of which are Black from poor families, are transferring wealth to coaches, athletic directors, presidents, etc. of universities. And there's got to be some kind of appreciation and ethical behavior, if anything. Are our ethics for sale? It's funny because we had Adam Silver here several years ago, and I asked him the same thing because of the impact that gambling is having on sports. Is our integrity for sale here?
well, I would say to that last point, people ask me what the biggest issue in college sports is today. The biggest issue for me is sports betting and the pervasiveness across the board and the fact that we will probably 100% probability have, according to the experts, have major college gambling scandals within the next 3 to 5 years. That all of a sudden changes the tenor, because I tell you, if you're the president of this university or any university, and you have a major gambling scandal on your campus, we're the only nation in the world that has sports betting on college campuses. That will be a wake-up call. And maybe the whole system needs to be re-looked at. In sports betting, this next year might not be a question of employment and fairness and equity student athlete. Maybe next year an issue of how we get this crazy sports betting thing under control that's prevalent on our campuses. And to me, I think Adam sees it at the NBA level, but and they have lots of tools to correct it. College sports is really the Wild West in this area. And so that is to me my biggest worry.
Well, it's because our kids are the most vulnerable.
They are.
Obviously, with no compensation. We can go back to the 70s when they had some of those scandals, which clearly we don't want to see. So part of this whole issue is how do we make them comfortable enough to know that they're not vulnerable.
I'm not in opposition to anything that you said. I just personally would rather see a different model than an employment model. Employment is complicated. And I'll just give you one simple example. If you're a student athlete here at Seton Hall and you get a scholarship, you know what it is, 30, 40, 1,000 a year, all of a sudden you're an employee. That scholarship is now taxable for you up only the first $5,250. The rest of it's taxed. So you may be an athlete that may not be that good. You may get a $30,000, $40,000 salary, and your education, you're going to get hit with a tax bill that probably eat up your whole salary. This issue is very complicated, and I just think we can come up with a model through licensing and through other means to accomplish the equities we want, but without necessarily, changing the underlying relationships. So
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
And I think the percentage of gross, how do we define revenue that they share? If you recall, going back again, the course direction change was defining what sources of revenue are we going to share with these student athletes?
the pro model.
The pro model.
Right.
The pro model is there. And
But it's complicated, Charlie,
It's there because a lot of work has been done on it.
It's complicated because of Title IX and also the subsidy of all the other sports. It's not, the NBA doesn't have to subsidize 15 sports that don't make money, nor do they have Title
Oh,
IX.
no, I think the subsidy could still be there,
Right.
but I'm saying as soon as you define that percentage of the revenue, you can work from there. We haven't even gotten there yet with regard to the NCAA.
I hear you.
Okay.
I think we're getting ready to go to the.
What a start to this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, you're free. I'll introduce you one at a time. We're going to expand our conversation now with the balance of the panel. The name, image, and likeness economy obviously is on fire. It is up an insane 55% from 2 years to last year. The list of those leading the parade, bloodlines help a little bit. Bronny James, USC Dion's son, Peyton, and Eli's nephew. At the top of this $1.4 billion economy in NIL. Players earning, players transferring. The entire coach-player relationship has changed. Just ask Gino Auriemma.
There aren't a whole lot of high level players coming to play at Connecticut going, I'm leaving for a better opportunity. All right. So I'm kind of fortunate in that regard. How does changing with the times help you have better relationships with your players when it's all transactional now? And it has nothing to do with the money. Forget the money part. This is about the ability that you can just walk out anytime you want. So How do you coach in an environment where the players feel like they owe you nothing and you owe them everything?
Let's now expand our conversation with our panel. One of the wonders and outrages of the moment is that Leonard Marshall is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. A two-time Super Bowl champion with the Giants, a financial professional, very involved in education and philanthropy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Leonard Marshall. Thank you, Leonard, for joining us today. It was 8 years ago that Joe Nocera's book, Indentured, profiled the reformers and the disruptors at the heart of what we now see as driving college sports. You've read him in the New York Times, Bloomberg, Fortune, Esquire. Please welcome Joe Nocera. And across 3 decades at outlets including ESPN.com and the Philadelphia Daily News, and now as a senior writer at The Athletic, Dana O'Neill has covered college sports with an in-depth and respected eye. Just back from the men's Final Four in Phoenix, welcome Dana O'Neill. Thank you all for joining us here today. So, Joe, what do you think about what you've heard so far? Congress is going to negotiate something, and
I love Tom, but Tom drives me crazy, and I drive Tom crazy. Here's what's going to happen, okay? Brett Kavanaugh is dying for another case. The Supreme Court's dying for another case. It's coming, the House case. They don't need antitrust legislation. The House case is going to blow the whole thing to smithereens. You'll have a free market. You'll have a free market. A free market means, Jay Billis has always had a great line on this. How are you going to pay the players? How are you going to pay the players? And Jay Billis says, well, you know, we have this thing in America. It's called a contract. You sign a contract. You say to the halfback, all right, I'll pay you $250,000 a year for 3 years, but you have to stay here for 3 years. You can't transfer. That's what you got to do. And you do that with linemen. You do that with linebackers. You do that with basketball players. You do that with the people who create the economy for the university. That's what you do. It's really pretty simple. All of these other issues are subservient to that. You don't need antitrust. And I'm terrified of antitrust exemption because I don't trust the NCAA to do the right thing. I mean, it's really that simple because they have a history of doing the wrong thing. And I think that I actually think if you litigate it, I don't think Title IX would be the monster issue that Tom says it is, because if you look at schools now, most schools have a almost 2/3 or 1/3 ratio of money spent on men's sports versus women's sports. A lot of that is because of football. And, you know, the idea that that the sport is subsidizing the non-paying, the non-revenue sports. The history department doesn't make any money. The English department doesn't make any money. If they think women's soccer has value, they'll keep doing it. If they don't think it has value, they won't keep doing it. And in terms of economics, you know, everyone says, oh, we don't have enough money to do this and this and this. Well, you have enough money to pay your coaches $6 million, $7 million, $8 million. Okay? You have enough money to do this. You know, college, there's no other place in the world where you have a big-time entertainment complex attached to schools of higher education. They don't really match. They don't really mesh. Especially now because there's so much money involved. It's really hard to get past how much money there is. Athletic departments now want to maximize revenues. That's what they do. So from my point of view, you know, having the players paid salaries, yeah, they'll have to pay taxes. Big deal. They don't necessarily have to pay taxes on their, they should be paying taxes on their scholarships now, but the IRS basically says you don't have to. The IRS could keep saying that. So, you know, from my point of view, if the House case was decided by the Supreme Court and it blows the whole system up, I say, right on.
All right. All this money, $1.5 billion in NIL and the economy, Leonard. I'm an athlete coming out into, well, Tom talked about the Wild West, the free marketplace. It's whatever you can get. What should a young man or woman coming out, especially in a revenue sport, what should their attitude be right now?
I think that you need to look at it from the perspective that, you know, you're earning this money now, you're a young person. You will not earn this money in perpetuity as you may think, because there's a thing called injury that comes into place, and you need to prepare for that. So I think that if I'm a young kid and I'm 17 years old, I'm walking to a program, and I'm going to go back to my program at Louisiana State University. I'm playing for a school, the highest earning revenue sport at the school. 109,000 fans every weekend, 8 times a season. I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about, I come from a very minuscule environment. My parents didn't have an education. I'm the first of my class in my family to go get this education. So what's the expectation of me? To become that provider or become that guy?
You're describing the demographic of much of college football. So.
Right. And I'm talking about, and I'm pointing at football. I'm just pointing at football because that's my sport. Yeah. And for that reason, for a young kid, my mentality would be, I'd have a different perspective on it. I know I'm getting scholarship to play this sport. I know I'm playing the highest revenue sport on campus. What's my goal when I go there? Get my education, go to the NFL.
Is it education first in this moment, in this wild confluence of all this money with the $100 handshake? Now you got to add digits to that.
Bob, that's what it used to be. Well, now it's by far different.
Exactly. Well, you saw Matt Rule talk about what the analyses that exist out there, organizations that look at what's out there in the portal. It's 7 figures.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I had this conversation with Brian Kelly at LSU. I said, Coach, how do you do it? Between the transfer portal, the NIL, programs with greater assets, how do you do it?
Yeah. Both Tom and Joe alluded to this. One of the leading congressmen looking at this issue, one of the subcommittee chairs, said that we have to, quote, save college sports as we know it, end quote. Has that ship sailed? You listen to Gino Oriema describe the coach-player relationship. What's in it for me? And God bless Trey Davis, moves on for whatever the reasons are, wins an NIT championship, had every right to do so.
Every right.
And you can transfer eternally now in the portal.
Yeah, I mean, so there's so much wrong and so much that they're trying to fix retroactively. I think everyone's trying to play catch up because the NCAA decided to be, the ostrich with their head in their sand for such a long time. And now everyone's trying to make up for everything. And it's led to a disastrous intersection. I find it really interesting because I think a couple things. Number one, I'm a cynic. So I would like to see the paperwork on all of these offers because the numbers that are being thrown out are being perpetuated by the agents who are cutting the deals, the coaches who are making the deals, and the athletes who are allegedly signing the deals. But no one's showing me show me the money. I want proof that the money that's being talked about is legit. Because I don't trust anybody. So I think everybody has an agenda, and until you show me the money, I don't know is a quarterback going for $1.5 million? Probably. Are all of them? Probably not. So I think we need to get there first. I had a conversation. I spent all of March with Purdue basketball, and they do business differently at Purdue basketball. And Matt Painter made an interesting point. Coaches have a lot of control. They all kvetch about what's being done to them. You can say no. An athlete says, I want $1 million to take an official visit. You get to say no, then don't come here. I will say no thank you to that player. Matt Painter told me flat out, those aren't my guys. So I do get a little bit aggravated with the coaches who think the world has sailed without their input. They're saying yes. But his point was there has to also be an exchange or an understanding. To Leonard's point about athletes, you get your money when you come on campus, but there is an exchange for sticking around for 4 years and having a university that you have a lifetime contract because they love you, because you've stayed and you've invested in the community. And while you might not make $5 million your first year, 10 years out, someone's going to take care of you. I'm not saying you don't get the 5 million, but I do think that, like I have 20-year-olds, they don't think beyond the end of next weekend. I get it. But if they thought long term a little bit, there is an exchange for sticking around. And I would like to see a little bit of that message being perpetuated instead of the coaches running around and acting like things are being done to them. Reverse the message a little bit.
Tom, what have we lost here in this current moment?
So I agree with a lot of what Joe said, that we need to have a compact with these, high revenue players that sort of locks them in to just like the NBA. When I was playing for the NBA, I didn't get up and have the right to move to another team. Matter of fact, it was inverse. I would be playing for a team, get home and say, by the way, you've been traded to the New York Knicks, be on the plane the next morning. And I was on the plane the next morning, starting for the New York Knicks the next night. So it wasn't all Tom McMillen had all the rights here. I think that, see, I'm an optimist. People say, well, Congress, you can never get anything done. And, well, look, this past weekend is a great example of a Congress that got something done. And I do believe in the long run, even though there have been very few bills passed with respect to college sports, I believe a new model needs to be constructed. And I agree with Joe in a lot of his points. I don't think the House case is necessarily determinative with respect to employment. It's determinative with respect to kids should get paid for their publicity rights. And the numbers they're using in that case is around 10% of the television money. But I don't think that case is determinative on employment. Here's my bottom line. I am in favor of a model that takes care of those high revenue sports, gives more athletes a right, a voice in this system. But I would go short. I would not be in favor of a pure employment relationship. And I think that where we're going to end up is a model that hopefully continues the model of college athletics as it is and as it has been, and not turn it into a mini NFL and a mini NBA. And that's the model I'd like to see forward.
Now, at the same time that all of this is happening, and of course the reason what happened in Congress made so many headlines this past weekend, it's so rare to see someone stand up as the speaker did and profile and courage. We haven't seen that in the last 8 to 10 years. But while all of this is happening and all the money is flowing into the system, there's been this group of about 10 individuals, including Brian Rolapp of the National Football League, Jimmy Haslam, who owns the Cleveland Browns, David Blitzer owns the Sixers, Grant Hill, a couple of school presidents, venture capitalists involved, looking at college football. Where could that lead? Venture capital money. They've moved into every other aspect, and every sports league is now dealing with capping or defining their contributions, venture capital. If you've got a big steaming pile of several $1 billion on the table, all best intentions might be gone with the wind.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't think I'd really want venture capital money in college sports. They would, then you really would have the minor leagues that it would be very disassociated.
Don't you have it now?
Well, you pretty much do. But there would be a separation that would go beyond, and VCs and private equity, if you think athletic directors want to maximize revenue, where do you see these guys? And plus they'll say, hey, Eastern Michigan, you aren't cutting it anymore. We're going to cut your football team, just like they did with Toys R Us. I want to say one thing, just talking about the sports itself, talking about basketball, if you had contractual relationships with players that went beyond 1 year, you would end the one and done.
Yeah.
That would be a wonderful thing. You watch the college basketball now, it is not as good as it was 20 years ago. Why? Because they're not teams anymore. They're freshmen who leave for the pros the next year. So I'm totally in favor of some kind of contractual obligation that you pay them in return for them staying more than 1 year.
That may be the best thing to do, to be honest with you. Because I think that between that and the gambling aspect of it, with private equity and everything else, I think it'll make it even more crazy. I mean, it's the Wild Wild West now. I mean, I look at games, I watch games on the weekend, whatever sport it might be. And I think of the aspect of gambling, how gambling has really taken, a big influence on sports. Big influence on sports. And I think that, just watch a game. FanDuel, name a company. They're heavily advertised.
Hey, how many John Tay Porters are there is the question.
I'm tired of looking at Jamie Foxx, on the commercial.
I did a story this past NCAA tournament run with Purdue, with the walk-ons and the scrubs,
Right.
because they get into the late game, and if they hit a shot, they can affect the spread. And the messages that one of their players, who, by the way, tore his meniscus in the beginning of the season as a senior, only stuck around to play simply to have that moment. And he gets in the game, junk minutes, junk time, hits a bucket, and he gets, I can't say it because I'm in a public place, but the stuff he was getting from gamblers because he affected the spread was unbelievable. So gambling is a big thing, but I would argue that to Joe's point about the one and done is a problem, but the transfer portal is 10 times worse because the one and done has kind of worked itself out. I mean, players have gotten a little bit of, pardon my, my Catholic schools, I can say it's pardon my Jesus. They've gotten some Jesus here to recognize not everyone's going to be drafted. So they've come back a little bit towards that. In fact, players are sticking around. Hunter Dickinson, Armando Bacot, they weren't good enough, frankly, for the NBA. The portal is moving players even more than one and done.
13,000 people in the portal.
And it's like players who don't need to go anywhere, who have a wonderful lot. Like, where are you going? Like, what is so bad about your life?
grass is
That you
always
got to
greener.
go.
I think
How many new pair of shoes, maybe?
And that's sometimes what it is. But sometimes it's just, I think it's like, I don't know, I hate trendy.
But the only way you can do that,
It's a good contract. I agree.
With a contract.
I agree.
If Google offers an IBM engineer twice the money, he's going to go.
He's going to leave, no question.
That's free enterprise. That's the American way.
I also just can't, maybe I'm an optimist, but I also can't imagine that the money does not. Mark Few, the Gonzaga coach, said to me at one point, smart business people are smart business people because they make smart business decisions. Like, when do we get to the point where business people or whomever or boosters are investing in college athletes and then they're realizing they're not getting the return on their investment and they cease? Like, at some point, people are the top 1% of athletes are going to make the money, and everybody else is like, well, here's your Chipotle gift card because you're not good enough.
Absolutely.
That's what it's always been, though.
That's going to happen.
Talk about
So I met with a lot of the private equity shops, and they're all struggling with the different state laws, Title IX, all the issues that involve there. But that football concept that you're talking about, all that is they're trying to pull TV back together again in a monopolistic situation, so there'll be more money. But guess what? They're going to get sued for monopolistic issues unless they get Congress to give them an antitrust monopoly. That's going nowhere. And by the way, Pete Rozelle in 1961 got a monopoly for the NFL in 2 months in 2 months he got that done. You know how he did it? He got Vince Lombardi in the Green Bay. He went to all of the smaller markets and said, I need you to mobilize your members of Congress. And if the NFL can get an antitrust monopoly, I think college sports can make a case if it's done the right way, if the monopoly is used for the right purposes. And that means doing more opportunities, more things for HBCUs. And so the bottom line is, I don't think private equity is going to change the world overnight here. And I think any of these television things require Congress. They're still going to require an antitrust exemption.
Didn't Congress at one point, when they expanded or amended in the mid-'60s, the NFL, that's why we have the New Orleans Saints, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Basically, you have a franchise and I get those 2 Louisiana votes.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
That's how they got it done.
Exactly. I do want to point out, we're going to take questions shortly. So there's a microphone here and we'll let you know when we get to that portion. By the way, a lot of facts and figures I would like to acknowledge. First of all, you see Len DeLuca. He is en route. Hopefully he will be here in time to join us. But 3 of his students have contributed great research to our effort. Vincent Nappi, John Tor Nordenson, and Daniel Vislaki. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your help. Much appreciated. So Dana, we talk about NIL fueling athletic machines, but here we are, we're the Big East, minus football, minus the great engine of football, has both the NIT champion and the NCAA champion. Now, yeah, it's a different sport, and 2 players have an outsized difference on a squad of 12 or 15 people, but NIL is not necessarily the be-all and end-all there.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I've made this argument with lots of people over time. College basketball, at least, has proven over the course of the last, 15 years, that the team that builds itself not chasing the trend of the day, whether that was one and done to start or now amassing as many people in the portal as humanly possible, doesn't generally win the national championship. The team that wins are the ones that grow players, fixing, UConn added Cam Spencer from Rutgers. They took Tristan Newton, who's a 2-year transfer. You take pieces and you mold it together. The money is not the same as it is in football. I mean, it is in some places. Kansas is doing everything above board now. That's all I'll leave that at. Anyway, so, there's still money out there for basketball. It's just never been the same with football. But yeah, I think the Big East is an interesting case because when it collapsed and reformed, I think there were plenty of cynics who thought that this is never going to survive. They don't have football money to compete. Well, because basketball is their primary sport, that elevates their concentration, their investment, if you will, on the sport. So I don't think it's necessarily a shock that they're winning. And Dan Hurley also knows what he's doing. That helps, as did Jay Wright.
Well, with a Seton Hall education.
With a Seton Hall, that's why. It's exactly why. So yeah, I mean, basketball is a bit unique, I think, but the same issues are involved because the portal for basketball is just out of control right now. Like I said, UConn being a prime example, they've got players going pro, that their entire roster is now essentially gone. So I think it's sustainable, but it takes, I keep going back to this, it takes a person who's got a little bit of strength of conviction in charge at the coaching level to say no, or to decide who you want to be. What do you want your team to look like, and what are you willing to tolerate?
You're hearing stories now from coaches, and usually not for attribution, about the new level of bleep they've got to deal with parents.
Oh, it's not just parents.
Entitled parents come, the kids too.
No, but I've heard coaches tell me that they've had boosters who have, here's my money to invest in your collective, and the booster's calling, my dude's not getting more than 4 minutes a game. What's going on? That's happening a lot. More, so it's parents, now they have agents. So it's agents. I want more, it's an investment property. So coaches are fielding calls from people who are investing in the player. Why isn't my player maximizing his minutes, ergo maximizing his potential, ergo maximizing my investment? That's absolutely happening.
Do these guys have do these boosters have a percentage if they go pro? Did they have some 10%?
That's the great unknown. That's why we don't know what these contracts, these deals look like. That's what I'm saying. I would like to see what these deals are. Are they renegotiated every year? I mean, I don't think anybody knows. And that's the big problem. I do think there's a lot of misinformation out there, but I would be curious to know, what have you signed as an athlete? What have you agreed to? Because I've talked to other athletes, who have been very, very. Drew Timme at Gonzaga was very particular about what he did, very careful. But I think there's a lot of bad deals being done. Did he do a gambling, Drew Timme? Casino.
Yeah. So there, it's all coalescing in that moment. Amateur, end quote, athlete doing a casino commercial.
Well, at least Caitlin Clark didn't do that.
Could you imagine Lawrence Taylor doing that back in the day?
He's fantastic.
How do you, Leonard, how do you play in that environment? Put yourself back in college when, maybe you'd get that $100 handshake. But athletes today are walking into a situation, they think they're walking into FAO Schwartz and they have the run of the place in the toy department.
Yeah,
But now they've got to balance all this stuff.
that's very tough. Very tough. I can tell you, I mean, I can recall moments coming out of college in 1983, or my last season at LSU 82, where I was putting in some uncompromisable positions. And I had to say no.
Yeah.
I had to say no. A lot of these kids today don't say no. They say, yes, I'm going to take a yes to the dress. You know, he wants to put it in my pocket. Why not? You know?
Let's look for, you gave us Tom,
Well, I mean, you know, I'm making an analogy here, you know. You know what I'm saying?
Tom, you gave us a political reading of the red and the blue sentiments in the House. What's the timetable? By the way, we are going to, if you have questions, you can think about lining up to ask your questions, and we'll get to that. But if you could give us an idea of what you see as the calendar. You've said we're in a critical period. The next year or two is critical. Can Congress get to it in the next year or two? And how much depends on what happens in November?
So I think there's a chance it get done this year, although I wouldn't highly bet on it. There's also a chance in the lame duck session. You know, Congress comes back afterwards. A lot of members leaving. You know, they oftentimes do those cleanup things. You know, it could very likely go into the next Congress, and a lot of that would be shaped by, you know, whether Democrats have the House, the Senate, presidency, or all of it, or none of it. So those will be factors. But if I were guessing, I would say within the next year or so, you'll get something done. There is a rising tide of interest in this area. And, you know, it's just people always never expect Congress to do the right things, but occasionally they do. It's the old Winston Churchill, you know, you can never count on America, but they'll do the right thing after trying everything else. And I just think that's the case here. I think higher ed, these institutions of higher ed are the crown jewel of America. And as we get closer and closer to an unstable world, I think that, you know, we've got to protect our institutions of higher learning. And 2 years from now, you'll have a panel up here, sports betting on college campuses. What the hell do we do now?
What do we do?
That's what's going to be up there within 2 years. And that's going to so complicate this issue that we're talking about right now.
But not only the gambling, as you alluded to, and Joe talked about attaching these multi-billion-dollar enterprises to institutions of higher education. In both Joe and Tom, in your research for your book, and Tom, and what you do, when you talk to administrators above at the athletic director level, how much do you see administrators, school presidents, provosts conflicted by what's going on, if not anguished?
There's nothing more, amusing is not the right word. There's nothing worse than watching a college president caught in the midst of an athletic scandal. They're deer in the headlights because this is not an area they even want to think about all that much. They want to go to the game and they want to go rah-rah and they want their team to win. But the intricacies of it, they really do prefer to leave it, they keep their hands clean and leave it to the athletic director. That's what I've found in my experience, that they just don't, with rare exception, they just don't want to be involved. Tom may disagree, but that's what I found.
No, I would tend to agree. Most presidents come up the ranks through Provo, and I think your president here was Provo before, right? Not sure.
Was he? Yes, I'm told.
So, I mean, that's the road. And as a result, they don't get inculcated in athletic issues. Now, there's a coterie of presidents around the country who are very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And so I would generally agree with Joe. Most presidents just kind of want not to deal with this, but there are some who are very active.
I would 100% disagree, just for the record.
All right.
I just because who decided that USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon should join the Big Ten? Not the athletic director, the presidents. They chase the money. They are chasing the money first, foremost. They sit on all the NCAA panels and they bleed their academic hearts, and then they sign the contracts for $8 million for the coaches, and they make the deals to join conferences that make absolutely no geographic sense for 95% of their athletes, and they take the money and they put it in their pocket and say it's for higher ed.
Touche.
We have a question, please.
Hello, my name is Pat Elliott. I work here in the University Advancement Department, and thank you for being here today. It's a fascinating discussion. My question is around, what all of what really Joe and Tom bring up a model, and being here at Seton Hall in the Big East and how it might, impact us. So, really talking about scaling and understanding that, Tom. 70 BCS schools might be in one bucket. There might be another 64 in another bucket. If there is some type of bargaining, right? And I do believe it needs to come under the auspices in some way of the university to maintain academic integrity, to hopefully do something about this transfer portal and everything else. But I guess my question is that a lot of these schools, your starting point for revenue is your television contract. And so there's no way that the Big East, and I think they'll start to renegotiate with Fox perhaps now, but the Big East, Seton Hall, will be in a different category in terms of revenue from, let's say, a television contract. I don't want to say it's the haves and the have-nots, because we see Big East schools can win national championships and NIT championships, but where do you, for the whole panel, where do you see, perhaps, is there going to be, let's say, by conference, some different things like salary caps or whatnot in that model? How do you kind of, is there going to be some type of formulation to how 363 schools or whatever it is now in Division I, how they're able to compete within the same division?
Okay.
I think you're gonna, ultimately, you are gonna ultimately have haves and have-nots. I mean, that's okay. That's okay. You're gonna have, a handful of football schools and basketball schools. They're gonna have basically one set of rules. I'm talking about economics, and then you're gonna have all the other schools and maybe the other sports have another set of economics. One thought that I think, this is slightly off point, but I think the hockey example is a really good one, because, the hockey schools have their own conferences and divisions, one in the East and one in the Midwest, and they don't have to travel all over the place. You don't have the soccer team going from, conference realignment hasn't affected them all that much. And I think it would be a very sane system to have football and basketball in one set of conferences and to have all the other sports much more regionalized. And so you'd have lower economics for sure. There's no law that says every school has to pay every player. I mean, you are probably going to wind up with divisions with schools that are a lot more like the Ivies or like Div 3, that basically maybe give a scholarship, but they can't afford to pay. And, that's okay. That's okay. Not every athlete is going to be a pro. Not every athlete is going to be good enough even to play Div 1 and make money. That's okay.
We'll say one thing that, and I agree again with a lot of what Joe said. One thing that people don't think about is the elephant in the room. It's called the IRS. The IRS came in during the Trump administration and taxed college sports very heavily. They took away any of their seat licenses, the seat license deductions, which cost schools millions of dollars, and they put a surcharge, 10%, on all salaries over 10%, over $1 million. If you start to look like a business with $1 million players and $1 million coaches, you're going to be eventually treated by the IRS like that. You may lose all your tax deductions. You may be taxed on your income from football. And what people don't realize is that with a $34 trillion national debt, this will be a very ripe area to come after. We've seen it in the preceding president. We can see it in the near future. And all of a sudden, that's going to temper that, run down that road to be bigger and better and more professional, because there's going to be consequences to it. And sometimes you just have to think about that.
I would argue too, there's already haves and have-nots, and there have been for ever. I mean, Michigan and Eastern Michigan both play football. They don't play it at the same level. It's just the way the world works. And people and programs and universities have learned to do more with less for years. I do believe it's going to get worse. I mean, look, the Big Ten and the SEC, if they had their way, would run the world. And they're trying super hard to do that. Yeah, they do. And they're trying to, they're trying to look, the ACC is falling apart because Florida State's trying to run away into whatever. So we're going to have that. We already have that. This is going to make it more challenging. That's what, we talked to, Gino Auriemma has one thing to say and Matt Rule has one thing to say. We'll go talk to the coach at Towson, whose players are all leaving because they don't have any money to give. Look, Seton Hall is a prime example. The money here is what it is. It's good. It's not even St. John's. Let's be honest. I'm going to call the elephant in the room. It is. And it's a problem. So that's going to exist. I don't know how to fix it, but it already exists and it's going to get worse.
I wonder how many NIL recipients realize they'll be getting 1099s from the IRS.
Actually, a reporter actually asked that question last year at the Final Four. That was.
Oops! What is this?
My kids don't know what tax forms are. They're like, "Where's my money?" So
they get them for the Alston payments. So every school that gives out Alston payments gives their kids 1099s. So that's not novel for them.
Once again, any questions? Step up to the microphone. We got a few minutes left before we bring this to a. Oh, do we have a question?
A question?
Yes.
Yes. It's a great discussion. I want to thank you so much for blessing yourself with your time. In your crystal ball, what do you see happening to college affordability as a result of some of the things you're talking about? Certainly, if things are no longer tax-free, that rolls to the many students who are not athletes here and their tuition bill. Can you speak about affordability broader than just the athletes in NIL and contracts?
It's a very good question. And I was at a board regent meeting in Maryland last week. We talked about the enrollment pressures in the future because of the high cost of education. And I think that it has impact on athletics too. I mean, think about student fees, for example. Now, some of the smaller schools, I'm sure there are student fees that your programs exist on, but that's paid by all the students in a campus, and there's great rebellion against that across the country. What happens if student fees go away? And students are saying, why should I pay student fees? Maryland gets $18 million a year. Why should I pay student fees when the quarterback's making $1 million and the coach is making him millions of dollars? And that's a real reality because of the 80% of college athletic programs, they all depend on student fees. Only the very top of them do not. And that's another real world consequence of the road we're going down, is that students are going to say, heck with this, I'm not going to pay. And then you're stuck. How are schools like Seton Hall going to fund their athletic programs? And those are real issues.
The cost of college does have some. There are the athletic department does have a role in the cost of college, but the cost of college by itself is like an independent thing that just keeps going up and up and up. I keep waiting for the bubble to pop because a lot of these prices are just absurd.
We're at $100,000 cost of attendance on at least one school this year, right?
When my uncle was a Dominican priest for many years, and when he died, he taught at Providence College for like 30-something odd years. And when he died, at his wake, I asked another priest there, I said, how much does Providence College cost? I thought he was going to say like $20,000, $25,000. He said $55,000. This was like years ago. And I said, what? And he said, well, if we don't charge that much, no one will think we're any good. And that is a lot of what's going on here in the non-Ivy world. Is that you want to keep up with the Joneses, so you gotta charge a lot of money.
Did I see someone else with a question?
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Taylor Henry. I'm an assistant professor in the Visual Sound Media department. I have my class with me in sport media culture and a few other students here. They're very grateful to not have to hear from me today. They're very grateful that you all shared your expertise, and I appreciate that. One of the things I'm interested in is suppose that there is collective bargaining or salary caps or other similar kind of rules that follow the big four American professional sports. Is this going to be another example of the NCAA selectively enforcing things? I was born in Dallas right after the SMU scandal hit, where they were doing things that 7 of the other schools in the Southwest Conference were doing, and they got the death penalty. And is this going to be, what's going to stop somebody like with the Calipari talk recently? The big emphasis was, hey, the Tyson Chicken guy is paying his salary, or, the Waltons are also involved there, all these other eccentric billionaires. What's to actually keep this from becoming the Wild Wild West, even if there are collective bargaining measures that are in place? Thank you.
The NCAA, what's the old joke? The NCAA is so ticked off the University of Kentucky, they slapped Southwest Missouri with a 5-year probation. Yeah.
That was a Jerry Tarkanian line.
Yeah.
That was Tark the Shark.
That was Jerry Tarkanian line. Yeah. I mean, I would say that the rule book, maybe in a good way, is finally shrinking because some of the rules in there were just ridiculous, right? A lot of what was against the rules is above the board these days. I mean, theoretically, anyway. I mean, the concept of name, image, and likeness is a hoot. I mean, no one's getting paid for their name, image, and likeness. They're getting induced to come. I've heard coaches tell me that so and so asked for $400,000 just to take a visit. That's nothing to do with that person's name, image, and likeness. That's just greasing their presence on campus. So there's a lot that has to be reeled back in. But I think the enforcement staff's ability to enforce anything is largely been difficult to begin with, and it's only getting worse. We just had Arizona State just went through a bunch of stuff. Michigan just went through their stuff, just came out. It's a probation, a slap on the wrist, and see you down the road. Theoretically, hopefully, maybe, although North Carolina would argue enforcing academic fraud should still be on the table.
Retroactively back 30 years, yeah.
But, I would argue that that's one thing that will probably disappear because they're just paying players isn't against the rules. I mean, what Leonard got right now,
We're gonna start.
Thank you.
We're gonna start all over now that Len's here.
Len, I honestly, my hand to our almighty power, hate to say this, but we're at the quitting hour.
Perfect.
Give us your box top take, Len DeLuca, who has negotiated 100 television contracts, ESPN, CBS, his own consulting firm, and has been teaching at Stillman. And he'll give you the last word, frankly, because we are at the quitting time. Folks have done arrangements. Where we're at right now and the prospect for meaningful reform in the next 18 months.
Well, where I think we are, and I'll look at it from a media standpoint, which is where we all have begun, going back to Charlie's March 1990 New York Times article after we closed the $1 billion CBS deal for 7 years. Hi, Joe. And he said it's time to give the players a piece of the deal. That was written 34 years ago after CBS made a $1 billion deal for 7 tournaments. Next year, it will get $1.1 billion for 1 year from Turner and CBS. So you see what has happened. And yet the players haven't gotten anything. And now what you see coming with the House case particularly is the fact that the judge allowed the look at for the class the television fees going back. And that is around the range of $4 billion that now could be at stake in the In Re NFL case. This is huge. Bob, where I see the future coming, and I don't know where the panel has gone with this, is maybe it's time for the conferences to declare their ability to get a antitrust exemption, but limited. So you send Petiti, Sankey, Phillips out there and say, Ackerman, we're going to act separately and differently because in order for, Bob, the television and the labor to get what they deserve, It may be that television, which started this, may be the way to get it out, which is the SEC and the Big Ten can play at one level. The ACC can play at another level. The non-football conferences, if they can survive without football, which many do very well, thank you, can do it at their level. But the NCAA, which I will leave you with the concept is the most patriotic organization in the country, only they can get the Supreme Court to vote 9-0 so many different times.
Strange bedfellows
We'll do it.
in this case, politically. And that will punctuate our discussion. Thank you to Charlie Grantham, Tom McMillen, Linda Luca, Joe Nocera, Leonard Marshall, Dana O'Neill, and thank you all for being here for this event.
This is great. Great job, John. Lena.
Nice to meet
Jordan,
you.
thank you. Nice to meet
Well,
you too.
thanks, Bob. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good.